Like it or not, another week is here, and this is a Monday edition here, Monday morning edition of Mic'd Up on Pittsburgh Sports Live, Pittsburgh Sports Now, and all throughout the Now family of networks. I'm your host, Mike Osti, and I am joined as always by my Mike counterpart, Mike Kowakan. And of course, we have another week of Steelers football, but we're going to pump the brakes on that for a bit. Of course, tons of our conversation still on this channel here on the Mic'd Up playlist, as well as on all the sites, of course, Steelers Now, about our takes from the last preseason game, the prior preseason game, and all the position battles this offseason and what's going on in camp. We'll get there as the Steelers play their third preseason game this coming Saturday night. Also, the post-game show from the last one, you can find all that content. And, of course, Steelers Now. But right now, we're going to have a conversation about what's going on in the college ranks with both Pitt and West Virginia, Pittsburgh Sports Now, and, of course, WV Sports Now for all our coverage throughout those networks on those sites and what's going on throughout their off seasons. And we are now not far from that season getting underway. And of course, we've touched on this before, tons of conversation about conference realignment and now rumors of a coalition between ACC, Pac-12, Big Ten, etc. Not a combined conference, but some type of partnership to try to fight this SEC power ship thing going on. We might not touch on that here on this show. Mostly about
football.
Mostly about the football teams. We now can talk football. It's been a while, and it's not been the focus of this offseason, but we're actually going to talk football since none of this is going to happen this year. So what's going to happen this year to these two football teams? So, Mike, you're back from your vacation. We're seeing you here in living color again. We got you over the phone mostly last week. Of course, Mic'd Up is presented by Martin Lawn Services, and their numbers behind Mike at 412-849-5894. So, Mike, starting with Pitt, they're in another one of those important off seasons because, of course, last year didn't go the way they wanted. Many fans, again, giving rope to Pat Narduzzi. Many fans, again, not giving rope to Pat Narduzzi, and he is still the head coach of the Pitt Panthers. Kenny Pickett is back, so there's a veteran quarterback there. That was in question. Some other players no longer there. Certainly, this potentially a year that's a bridge to the future, but when you have a veteran quarterback, you certainly have a chance. And some other pieces are there. I know you actually kind of like what Pitt's been doing this offseason. And when you look at the landscape of the ACC right now, it's not like there's world beaters there. Of course, Clemson, Miami should be there this coming season, but Florida State's still in the midst of a rebuild. Virginia Tech's still in the midst of a rebuild. There's a potential, chance for Pitt to grab the bull by the horns this year.
Yeah, some fans have reminded me, and they might be right. I don't remember it this way, but they've I'm bullish on Pitt this year. I really am. I just think that things are lining up. The whole key, as you touched upon, Pickett coming back. I really like where they are. And the reason I say that is for the first time since Pat Narduzzi has taken over as coach, which is now, 6 years ago?
It's been a while, yeah. It almost feels like yesterday, but it's been a while.
For the first time, I believe they have a team that can support itself. Yeah. In the past, it's always been the defense has to play well. They have good defensive personnel. Can the offense score enough points?
Right.
I think this year, for the first time, even if the defense, has a stinker and they gave up, 28 points or whatever, I think this offense has the potential for the first time to be able to help the defense out and to, okay, you didn't play well, we're going to score 35. And the people they have, the depth they have at wide receiver, they have some guys that are on the 2 and 3 deep that could be starting for some teams. They really have a lot of talent. And the thing that, it was this way last year, but they seem to be a little different. They finally have a running back.
I was going to say, what are your thoughts on the running game? Because that's one thing that's been missing since James Conner.
They were trying to get it done with Vincent Davis, and all credit to him. He's a tough SOB, but he's only 5'7", 5'8", 180. And those guys, you know what their role is.
I know that was your concern last year on a lot of.
Yeah, he's just not big enough. Nobody has as much heart as Vincent Davis, but Israel Abanikanda is finally, I believe, arrived, He's up to 220 pounds now, 225.
Nice pronunciation, by the way.
Thank you.
That's not easy.
One of the few times I get a pronunciation right. But he's still running a 4.3. He is blazing. His biggest problem last year was he couldn't pick up the pass protection, and you get your quarterback killed.
Mm-hmm.
I think those problems have cleared out. They have a tight end, that Lucas Kroll, that people are talking about, that's going to get highly drafted. And this is an offensive line now that is playing together for a second year. Last year was the first year that they were playing together. This year is year number 2. They're going to get better, and the defense is going to be really good again, despite graduating 4 or 5 guys.
The defense seemingly has always been that unit that going into a season, Pitt fans could rely on and could be confident in. Has always been a question mark of the offense, or at least recently, and Kenny Pickett having to maybe do too much. I think one of the keys also is obviously Kenny Pickett being there, veteran quarterback. That's big. And Pitt fans seemingly are hard on him all the time, but he is such an important piece, and who knows where this team would be this year without him. But it's also needing to make sure they don't rely on him too much, because we've seen in recent years, too, that he's having to do it on the ground. He's having to do it through the air. He's almost getting killed out there. It was a weaker offensive line last year. So Pitt kind of going into a season where the Steelers potentially would be a year from now with an offensive line that, while inexperienced, has at least had a year together and should be a little better off. And that should help the running game as well. That also could have been an issue last year with the running game, and then Pickett having the weapons, but also not needing to do too much. He's not a Heisman winner out there, even though he's been a solid quarterback. So you can't just throw the weight of the world on his shoulders all the time.
I tell you this about Kenny Pickett. Nobody's worked harder than him.
Yeah.
And they're going to say what they want, but come next April when we do our draft show, I think Kenny Pickett's a guy that we're going to hear.
Can be discussed.
No, he's going to get drafted. He's worked himself into a position where, unless he has an injury or whatever, he's going to find himself getting drafted next year. And the other reason I'm hyped on Pitt this year, Mike, is for the first time they have a manageable non-conference schedule. In the past, they've tried to mix in a lot of teams that I'm not completely against, but if you want to win, you can't go up against Murderers Row in the non-conference and try to be a hero and then wonder why your record's bad.
Yeah, I think that's a mistake West Virginia's made that we're going to get to.
Exactly. Yeah. This year they have UMass, Western Michigan, New Hampshire, and at Tennessee, and that's a rebuilding Tennessee team.
Right.
So I see no reason why Pitt, Tennessee is going to be a challenge despite not being as good. Just going down there with 100,000 people is different. But I see no reason why Pitt doesn't start out 4-0.
Yeah, and remember, they've had seasons, though, in recent memory where they did start out 3-4-0. That was an historic situation when the Steelers were starting undefeated. So was Pitt. They were starting 3-0. And then, of course, that season plummeted. So you got to do it all the way through. That would Pitt. I'm sure Pitt fans are going to comment and scream, yeah, we've started 3-4-0 before, and the season got ruined. So it's all about the entirety of the season continuing on. I'm going to ask you 2 questions here before we transition to WVU. If Pitt has everything go well, if Pitt has a successful season and things are perfect, what would that be to you in terms of, is it 9 wins? Is that a plateau that would mean it's been a successful season? Obviously, you got to be reasonable. This isn't Alabama here. Does Pitt have to maybe make one of those New Year's Day bowl games? Is that a possibility? Could they compete to be below Clemson? Could being in the ACC championship game, which actually happened in recent memory, be something? Or is it 8 or 9 wins just in general, even 7, 8 wins? Would that be considered a successful year in comparison for Pitt?
I think 9 wins is. I think 9 wins is going to happen this year. I've said that. I'll have a column coming up as we get closer to the season. But looking at the schedule, their 3 toughest games are going to be obviously October 23rd against Clemson. They're going to take on North Carolina. However, that game is going to be at Heinz Field. And then Miami. Those are, and Pitt historically plays well against Miami at home. They have them this year, October 30th. They have all 3 of those games at home. And, even if you lose 2 of those games, which, I would be upset if they beat Clemson. But I think they could split with North Carolina. And I think Pitt's going to be in the mix for, I'm not saying they're going to win the Coastal, but it's going to be it's going to be a battle between North Carolina, Miami, and Pitt for the, and they have a chance to play in the ACC championship game, I think. But I think they do finish the season with 9 wins. What that gets them, I don't know.
Yeah, but if they get to that 9-win bar, even if they don't win the Coastal, because Miami could be a top 15 team, that's certainly a successful ride. That certainly continues on. That certainly changes kind of the tone of the last couple of years for sure. Now, if things go awry and Pitt loses games they shouldn't lose and makes those wins, and they get a big win, but then it becomes irrelevant because somehow they lose another game they shouldn't lose, and you're dropping to Tennessee or something like that, even though, of course, it's a rebuilding Tennessee team on the road. What would occur? What would you think would have the wheels fall off here? Is it Kenny Pickett getting hurt?
Yeah, injuries. I think I say that, but no, I think Kenny Pickett would be the thing, because I'm not going to say injuries, because one of the things that is really strong on Pitt this year for a lot of positions, not every position, but I'd say most positions, is, this, Mike, recruiting, you don't take 100 guys in a recruiting class.
Right.
It takes years to build up. Sometimes you have some misses, sometimes you have some hits. But if your administration gives the coach years to recruit, like they've given Narduzzi, they've built up a lot of quality depth. And as I mentioned, at the wide receiver position, they got a lot of guys that are on the second and third team that if the first team guys go out, I think Pitt can withstand some injuries. However, they can't withstand an injury to or a Bonaconda either. I don't know that they have that's one position that I think they need to shore up, is for depth for the future, is running back. I don't know that they have I wouldn't be as confident with Vincent Davis as the starter.
Yeah. And that makes it harder on Pickett too.
Right,
If you lose a solid running game, you're really going to screw Pickett over.
You're going to go back to asking him to throw 50, 60 times.
And scramble out of the pocket. And
you don't want that to happen. Yeah, we're going to turn here to West Virginia. That's up your alley this year. What, we're covering them. We're at their practices. What is the strength for Neil Brown's team this year? I know Daggie's returning, just like Pickett. Aside from the quarterback position, what does he have on his team that he likes about that he likes?
Well, obviously it is the quarterback position as well, like Pitt. I think these two teams kind of have that similarity, that they have a veteran quarterback coming back, and Daggie not as veteran as Kenny Pickett, but this season should be even better than the year before. And last year, I think, was better than some Mountaineer fans thought. He had that stinker going to Texas Tech, going back home. Some big games he's not been good in. But Jared Daggie being there is certainly a big deal. So he's a key that if he can take that progression, the team can take that progression. But I think offensively, they're even going to be better. I think offensive line-wise, I think Letty Brown, I think this team is going to take another step offensively. And defensively, I think people actually forget last year, despite all the controversy of the offseason and having to get a new defensive coordinator and Vic Koenig and the whole racism scandal and all of that, they were number one in the country defensively the first few weeks of the season last year. It's insane to say that. So I do think offensively they're going to take a step. I think Jared Daggie's going to take a step. I think Letty Brown still is. He really, for a while, was an elite running back in the country and certainly can carry the team. They maybe only go as far as he takes them. I think maybe the difference is that with Jared Daggie and Kenny Pickett might have a little higher threshold of being able to carry them through a couple games than Jared Daggie. Jared Daggie, I don't want to call him a game manager, but he's not going to explode, I don't feel, and throw 450 yards if needed in a game. They are going to kind of go as far as Letty Brown takes them. But I think offensively, this team will take a step. This team will be a little more exciting. I think they'll have a veteran presence there, and that'll take them a little bit further. But there's going to be some question marks.
What's the biggest question mark on this team?
I would that's an interesting question there. I could, it could be on the defensive side of the football. It could be, I think there's linebacker depth now. They're probably secondary defensive line potentially for the Mountaineers. They were a great defense last year at times, but it was at times. I don't have as much concern about the offense as, say, the defense, I guess. But you're looking at another year of Neil Brown. You're looking at another year of Jared Daggy. You're looking at another year of Letty Brown, another year of this offense. And there is depth defensively. So, you lose one, you lose Darius Stills, you lose one Stills brothers. So that's why I maybe would go defensive line, just because you're losing an all pro out there. You still have the other one. But I would say maybe defensive line, because that was a position last year that teams would go in there. I know, talking to a lot of other media members and colleagues around the Big 12 on those post-game shows and preview shows, that it was, well, our running game's solid, but it's not going to be able to be as solid this week because we know we're going up against the Still brothers. We know we're going up against the Mountaineers. They had to almost change their game plan at times. That might not be as much of the case losing one of them this year, but I definitely think Jared Daggy, who, again, Mountaineer fans are a little bit hard on here, is going to take that progression and certainly going to help things here forward.
I saw him mention CBS had a column the other day, last week, talking about making the reference to Zach Wilson, the BYU quarterback, and because he kind of came out of nowhere last year.
That's interesting.
And they listed 5 quarterbacks. I think that they titled the column or article the Zach Wilson of 2021. And Jared Daggy was one of the 5 quarterbacks listed in that thing, talking about they believe the guy has a chance to make a big jump this year.
Yeah, I think it's kind of weird to say. I almost feel like Jared Daggy's either going to make that big jump where he's going to be able to have one of those Big 12 quarterback seasons. I don't know, maybe unlike Pickett, I don't know if I have much thoughts for him in terms of the NFL, but I certainly think he can take a step this year. And if he does, it certainly can propel this team. You're looking at Texas still kind of in their progression of, they claim they're back every year, but it's still going to take a minute to get going. Oklahoma likely going to win the conference again. But speaking on Pitt's schedule, I think this is another advantage for West Virginia this year. Maybe not for maybe not the next season, maybe not a couple years ago. Sometimes that out-of-conference schedule was rough with starting years with Alabama, etc. But Maryland, LIU, they do play Virginia Tech out of conference. And then, of course, the Big 12 schedule there with Oklahoma dealing with Texas Tech, who was an issue last year, Oklahoma State, Texas, Kansas State, etc., Iowa State, Baylor, Kansas in there as a gimme. It's not murderer's row this year for the Mountaineers. Again, they have a pretty favorable out-of-conference schedule. Virginia Tech is seemingly perpetually in a rebuild. And the other games, LIU, you certainly figure you're getting a W. And Maryland is a team that they have this weird, I don't really feel it's a rivalry. I know some fans think it is geographically. They also kind of go after each other in recruiting. That's why they play more so than a rivalry, because there's not one game anybody can point to. When I try to bring up, I don't think it's a rivalry to you, well, name me a game that meant anything between these two teams playing. There's literally not one. They've never meant anything at all to each other in football. But that should be a game that's in favor of the Mountaineers. So you start the season off with a couple wins. You go into conference play. They're going to have their struggles. But what you got to hope for West Virginia is they don't do what they did last year and they kind of did towards the end of Holgorsen, is they win games they weren't expected to win, and they lose games they should be expected to win, where you lose to kind of the middle of the road programs and you lose a game to Oklahoma State. It'll be interesting what Iowa State is this year after being so good last year, kind of out of nowhere. It'll be interesting what Baylor is this year after 2 years doing that, and then last year taking a dip. TCU, a team that usually is better than what they were in recent memory. And of course, Texas, will they actually take that next step, or are they going to keep being what they've been? But oddly, for any Texas fans that tune in, the Mountaineers have kind of not, I don't want to say owned, but they played pretty well against Texas in the last 5 years or so. They've certainly been able to compete with Texas and have that big win, of course, with Will Grier last second of that game. So this schedule's not that brutal for West Virginia in comparison to recent years. You have Jared Daggy another year. He should take that jump. Letty Brown still is there to take over games if necessary. The wide receiver group is there, and there was depth years ago. I don't know if there's as much depth now, but they certainly should score points. You lose an all-pro, all Big 12, one of the better players in the country on the defensive side of the football. You got to figure there's a dip back there, but it's also another year of continuity now. And last year, what they did, they went into the season with so much chaos around the coaching staff defensively. This is now a full year of being able to go through camp, go together, and learn all that together. And secondary-wise, I would say maybe is that number one concern, just because that seemingly always is a weakness for West Virginia. But this is definitely a schedule and definitely a season that they could take that step. Now, what it means, I mean, again, unlike the ACC, there's not a division situation, so it's not just winning a coastal or winning that type of a division. They would have to be one or two in the Big 12 to get in that title game. Probably unlikely to happen, but they flirted with it even a couple, even last year at times, even though it probably wasn't going to go down. Oklahoma's the class of the conference, as they always are.
Yeah.
But it depends on what happens with a lot of teams that were good last year and whether they rebound and do the same thing. Oklahoma State, of course, now, losing a top dog. So we'll see what they do. But there's nobody in the Big 12 outside of Oklahoma that you look into this year and say that it's just going to be a world beater and could get in the playoff or going to win the national title. Oklahoma could squeak in there like they normally do. But this potentially could be a down year for the Big 12, and that could be something the Mountaineers take advantage of. I would say if they get to 9 wins, kind of like Pitt, they got to take that next step, because last year they got in a bowl game. They won the bowl game. The year earlier was a complete rebuild. They were getting over Dana Holgorsen, the cupboard kind of being bare. If they get into a situation where they're securely in a bowl game, and it is a quality bowl game, nothing against last year playing Army, but a quality bowl game securely in there, they know they're getting in, and they don't have to play for a bowl game those last few weeks. And then, of course, if they have a chance at even getting in the conference title game or even flirting with that, and if they would get to 8 wins or something like that, I think that is a progression over where they were. And then next year, maybe the sights are higher depending on what these teams do. But yeah, tons of our coverage over there at WV Sports Now, all through training camp, coach interviews, player interviews. Got some players changing numbers randomly, which isn't great for the media gallery. But nonetheless, we have tons of coverage over there. And it's crazy. This season's not too far away.
Oh, I can't wait. I can't wait to be at Heinz Field September 4th.
Yeah.
Just start watching football again. And the biggest thing I see with West Virginia real quick is
yeah, sure.
I think this is a build. The climb is his
trust the climb, right?
Trust the climb, yeah. And I think with this recruiting class, that's going to get so much momentum. You have a recruiting class right now. There's 17 in the country.
Right.
That'd be their highest ever. That's just momentum. That people hear that, recruits see that, and then you build upon the next year. You just start layering that talent there, and that's how you build a program. You could be good for 1 year, but you need to sustain it, like those, as you mentioned, Oklahoma and programs like that. Yeah. You keep getting top 20, top 15 recruiting classes. That means you have players, and right now they have 5 4-star players, which is really good. And the key is those are at key positions: quarterback, running back, wide receiver, cornerback. So Neil Brown and his staff, Trickett, Chad Scott, all those guys doing a heck of a job down there.
Yeah, I think WVU is very lucky to have Neil Brown with his age, the fact that he loves being there. Media fans, everyone seems to love him. They're giving him the rope that was necessary, talking to some colleagues down there, that it literally was referred to as year 0, his first year at a program. So think about the pressure on coaches at major programs to have a school and have Shane Lyons, the AD, be willing to call your first year at a program year 0. That shows you they're giving you time. They're not worrying about it. It was all gravy. Now, what you don't want to happen, and this is the only way favor would be lost, is if all of a sudden this ends up being a 5-win season and you're puttering out of a bowl game after getting in last year. It is a rebuilding process, but I feel like that's the only way fans would maybe lose some rope. But you mentioned, even if that would occur, you have a solid recruiting class, maybe the best in program history, as crazy as that is to say, that it's going to certainly be built for the future, and the cupboard is in no way bare like it maybe was at the end of Holgorsen. So it's a long-term process. It is trust the climb. It's not trust the sprint. It takes a minute to get back there, but this is the year to seize the day. This is Carpe Diem. This is not a loaded Big 12 right now this year. There's tons of uncertainty, obviously, with the conference in general, but this is that year that it's kind of in flux. The Mountaineers have some veterans still there. Daggy, Brown, a year from now, we're not going to be talking about them. So this is kind of the year to do it, but of course it's being built up beyond that, and you have a lot of coaches that want to be there. So unless the only negative is if Neil Brown really turns it on and they'd make this a 10-win season, the next year make it a 9-win season, I feel like Neil Brown will be plucked. Some other schools will be going after him when you look at his age, but it certainly seems like he's a perfect fit with WVU. And actually just look, the Mountaineers currently a 3-point favorite on some really, really early Vegas odds over Maryland.
That's good.
They dominated the last time they played back in 2015 and usually win that rivalry. I'm surprised it's actually not more, to be honest with you, because Maryland's never really a team that scares anybody, but that can be close. So we'll see. Usually that might be a good bet, honestly, for betting people right now, to bet the over on that if that currently continues to be what it is. I'm expecting them to start out strong. It's not a brutal schedule. And when you have veterans, Pitt and West Virginia both, you have a veteran quarterback who's been there and done it, should only get better. You have a stabilization of the running game, which will help receivers. And then defensively, bend, but don't break too much, and you should be okay. So both of them don't have brutal out-of-conference schedules that normally they like to filter in there. So this is good.
We'll have a lot of happy post-game shows.
Could be
this year.
Yeah, could be. So we will see. Either way, usually there's engagement for those. But yeah, we will see. That'll do it for this edition of the show here to start off this Monday. We're kind of opening things up here, not too far from those seasons. We'll leave conference realignment alone for the day, and we talk some football. So that was great to do that. Pitt, West Virginia, the outlooks coming into those years. And then, of course, stick with us. Pittsburgh Sports Now, WV Sports Now, and also, of course, Steelers Now right now with our off-season coverage. Steelers play this coming Saturday, so we'll get to all that throughout the week, touching anything else going on with these teams throughout the week and any news that happens throughout the week. Also, of course, our newly crowned Pittsburgh Baseball Now with what's going on with the Pirates if anything else occurs throughout the week. For Mike Vukovic, for all of us throughout the Pittsburgh Sports Now family of networks and Pittsburgh Sports Live, I'm Mike Osti, and that'll do it for this Monday morning. So grab a cup of coffee and enjoy your day.